Welcome to Primary Care Premises podcast from BW Healthcare Surveyors. I'm your host, Will Ellis, and today we're going to be talking about maximising your premises finances. So if you're in an owner-occupied premises, we'll be talking about how to increase your rental income. And if you're in a leasehold premises, we'll be talking about a couple of ways in which you can potentially save a bit of money from your outgoings and things, the money that you're paying the landlord. So in terms of an owner-occupied premises, the main way of kind of looking at your finances is how can we increase the rental income that you are receiving. And the best way of doing that is having a look at your notional rent. So the notional rent that you receive from the NHS, how can you look at increasing that? And again, one of the best ways of doing that is just every time that is assessed by the NHS, just make sure you get an external opinion. So an opinion, get that appealed by an independent surveyor, get it checked by an independent surveyor, just to make sure what the NHS are proposing is correct and in line with the current market. Make sure they've not made any mistakes in terms of counting the number of car parking spaces, or perhaps they've mismeasured the surgery, not including the room that should be included. So just when you receive that district valuer's report, just pass it on to a specialist surveying firm and just have them check to make sure everything is correct and in line with the current market. Another way of looking at it in terms of increasing the rental income is having a look at perhaps some spare space that you have in the premises. So is there a room that's not being utilised? Is there a space in the surgery that's not being reimbursed for notional rent? Could you perhaps look at contacting the ICB to seek approval to get that rent reimbursed? Or could you look at potentially renting that space out to an alternative therapist or a pharmacist or something like that? So having a look at how to utilise your existing space and making sure you're maximising the use of that as well. And then other ways is perhaps looking at upgrading and improving the surgery. So perhaps you're using all of the space in the premises, perhaps you've maximised the existing notional rent that you're receiving, but maybe you could look at ways of upgrading and improving the surgery, because if you can modernise the surgery, that's going to potentially increase the notional rent. Or if you can look at even extending the surgery, is it feasible to build an extension on the surgery? And again, obviously extending the surgery is going to increase the floor space, which is potentially going to increase the notional rent as well. Now, if you are building an extension, it is very, very important to be aware that you'll need to seek approval from the NHS. So do not just go and build an extension and just assume it's going to get reimbursed. That is not how it works. And getting retrospective approval can be very, very difficult. And actually the premises cost directions that kind of govern how the rents are determined actually restrict you from being able to do that. So prior to building any extensions, always just make sure you get approval from the ICB through the process. Now, another thing to do is if you're already renting space out, so if you're already renting space out in the surgery, perhaps to a pharmacist, is making sure that the rents they're paying are up to date and in line with the current market. So if you've got any outstanding rent reviews, just making sure that they are actioned, and again, that you use specialist surveyors just to make sure that the rents they are paying are in line with the current market. Now, if you're in a leasehold premises, it's a little bit different. It doesn't really matter the rental income that you're receiving, as long as that's getting fully reimbursed, it doesn't really matter with the rent you're paying the landlord, as long as that's getting fully reimbursed by the NHS. But always make sure that is the case. So whatever you're paying the landlord should be reimbursed by the NHS. If there isn't, if it's a discrepancy or a shortfall in some way, again, it might be worthwhile seeking advice from a specialist surveyor to understand why that shortfall is there, and if perhaps at the next rent review that can be look at reduced or removed entirely. When you're in a leasehold premises as well, and what a lot of practices aren't aware of, we face this issue with a number of our clients, is you will receive the rent from the NHS. You should pay that in full to the landlord. Now, that is only on the proviso that you're only responsible for the internal repair and maintenance of the premises. If you're responsible for the external repair and maintenance of the premises, which is actually the landlord's responsibility, you'll be eligible for a retention of rent. So the rent that you receive from the NHS, you don't actually have to pay that in full to the landlord. You can retain somewhere between 5 and 7.5% of that rent. And the idea is you put that rent into a sinking fund, and then that sinking fund, the money in there is used to fund any external repairs and maintenance of the premises. So if you're in a leasehold premises and you're responsible for both the internal and external repair and maintenance, but you're still paying the landlord in full for the rent you're receiving, you need to have that checked. You need somebody to come in, have a look at the lease, determine what you're responsible for, and perhaps look at moving forward, ensuring that you get that retention of rent. It can be very difficult to again do that retrospectively, and also you can only really do it when the landlord instigates the rent review. But again, just seek advice from a surveying firm who can check the lease and advise you of the best process to ensure moving forward you retain the necessary amount of rent. And the last point to make is specific really to practices who are in perhaps buildings that are owned by NHS Property Service or CHP, or in multi-occupancy buildings, so that where there's more than one surgery within the building, and you're charged a service charge. So if you're charged a service charge, you're paying service charges to your landlords, whoever that may be, just make sure that those service charges are again correct in line with the current market. Make sure you're not paying for things within that service charge that you're not actually receiving. You know, we've had examples of practices who are paying for gardeners and they don't have a garden, or they're paying for lift maintenance and they don't have a lift. So just having a look at what the service charges, how they're itemised, making sure you're actually receiving those services. And if you are receiving all the services, that's fine. Another thing you can check is make sure that the services you are receiving, you're not overpaying for. Make sure you're not paying over the odds for those particular services. And again, getting advice from a specialist surveyor or even solicitor to have a look at those service charge schedules and just make sure the charges are in line with the current market and you're not overpaying. So that's really that. They are the main things to think about. So if you're in a rented premises, think about the retention of rent, think about potentially the service charges that you're paying. And if you're in an owner-occupied premises, it's all about the rental income. How can you maximise that rental income? That's it for me today. Thank you for listening. Join in next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.